Welcome to The Dream Boat. This is where we explore everything to do with dreams.
We are sponsored by the DRI, Centre for Dream Studies, and you can find out more about our work in the show notes.
You can join us here every fortnight or at one of our dream courses, workshops, or retreats. Thank you for coming on board.
What if we shouldn't be trying to get something out of our dreams, but instead turn the whole concept on its head and ask ourselves a very interesting question? What does my dream long for? Yes, this is a very different approach, and it's thanks to my guest today, the celebrated dream worker and author, the Canadian Toko Pa Turner. Toko Pa established her own dream school in 2001 based on her Jungian and Sufi background, with now, I think, about 100,000 odd dreamers coming out of her training. That's quite an achievement. And she has just released her latest book, The Dreaming Way, which has received the 2025 Nautilus Award for Personal Growth. And this comes on the back of her acclaimed first book, Belonging, Remembering Ourselves Home, which has also won multiple awards. So Toko Pa, welcome. Nice to have you on board.
It's great to be here, Laura. Thank you for having me.
So tell us about the dreaming way, because it's quite a different approach to how people normally like to analyze dreams.
Yes, well, it felt like it was a book that people had been asking me to write because I had been teaching about dreams for decades. And it felt like a daunting task to try to not only give language to the ephemeral world of dreams, but to sort of coalesce that all into some sort of narrative, book form. So it was a challenge, and it took several years to finish. But the idea behind the Dreaming Way is I wanted to introduce people to the method that I use to work with dreams, which I call the Courtship Method. And so courting the dream is, as you sort of mentioned in the intro, a very different approach to the dreaming, where instead of treating our dreams or our symbols as objects, we're actually treating them as living beings. And what I mean by that is that we can have a relationship with them by circumambulating them, by circling them and trying to discover what they want, what they long for, what they have to say. And so it's a very different approach to I would say, a sort of interpretive method or even a rationalistic method that we see often in psychology. Which is kind of the ideology out of which dream dictionaries come. Where you want to know what your dream means, and so you pick up a book and you look up the symbol and there's the answer. But this tends not to be satisfying in any sort of meaningful way for helping the dreamer to coalesce a sense of meaning in relation to their personal lives and with their own sense of purpose. And so I developed this method of what I call keys. And the courtship keys can be used interchangeably with one another, but they are essentially postures that we can inhabit that allow the dream to open its depths to us. And the image that I like to use is, let's say, for instance, you have a lover and you never show any interest in that lover. You just assume you know who they are and you're only interested in what you care about. Well, eventually that lover will become distant and maybe even disappear altogether after enough time. Well, if we treat our dreams like lovers, we want to find out who they are, what they love, what gives them meaning, what arises from their knowing. And when we come into relationship with that, it changes us, as any great relationship will. But not only that, it changes the dream. And so you have this exchange that takes place between you and your symbols. And it becomes like a relationship that's mutually and reciprocally fulfilling.
Yeah, regular listeners know, I often say, the psyche keeps knocking on your door. It's got something it wants to say to you. Are you actually going to pay any attention? But I really like this as a sort of, as a flip on it. Have you got any examples, Toko Pa, of how you work with it?
Yeah, for sure. So I mentioned the courtship keys. And so maybe I'll just quickly tell you a little bit about what those keys are. And they may sound deceptively simple, but they can really take a lifetime to master. And one of the most amazing things that has come to me from these keys is the realization that these keys are not just helping us with the opening of the dream, but they're actually shaping us as human beings and helping us to live into deeper relationship with everything around us, with ourselves, with other people, with the more than human world all around us. So the first key, as I describe it, is presence. Embodied presence. And so this is when, say, you're listening to somebody else's dream and you are truly showing up for that listening process. And by that, I mean, you're not composing your to-do list in your head. You're not waiting to share your dream. You're not summoning your interpretation. You're actually just really showing up with presence for the dream itself. And of course, you can do this for yourself as well as for another person. And this means also listening to all of the communications that are happening in your own body. So that could look like resistance, like at a tense point of dream, you might feel your heart beating faster. You might feel your throat closing up. You might feel a sense of exuberance or jubilation or joy that comes up in an awe-striking image. Whatever is happening in the communications of your body need to also be acknowledged and maybe put to the side while you bring presence to the dream, but they may come into play later in the process. So that's just the first key, is just really showing up for the original statement, the prima materia of the dream.
Very alchemical. I really like that. And do you have a particular dream that brings your approach alive? Have you got an example of a dream that would help see it in its process?
Yes, certainly I can try to conjure something from recent memory. I had a dreamer come to me recently, and they had a dream of being trapped in a Catholic church. And the dream, they had originally gone to this church as a result of being invited to some sort of celebration. But once they got into the church, they realized they couldn't leave, that they were trapped there. And there was this whole sort of army of matrons of the church who were policing the people inside the church to make sure they conformed. And there were penalties. And so this dream, you would immediately make associations to religion and to perhaps the idea of feeling trapped in the conformities of an established tradition. But the dreamer had no real connection to Catholicism. And so we had to sort of enter the somatic experience of the dream carefully and slowly to see what associations and feelings came out of the dreamer's own experience. And so when somebody tells me their dream, what I'm trying to do is put myself as viscerally as possible into the dreamer's shoes. And that means putting my own associations and ideas aside and really having a kind of beginner's mind where I can ask, how did this feel for you? What was your experience here? And try to get to the subtle somatic articulation of what they were experiencing in the dream. So instead of just making assumptions about what a Catholic Church might mean to me, or even to the dreamer, or to even from a collective perspective. What we're trying to do with the courtship method is to enter into the somatic experience of the dreamer's perspective, to get into their gestalt. And we do this through the next key, which I call the key of curiosity, of wondering. And so we ask what might appear to be very basic questions, but which actually really help both me as the dream worker and the dreamer themselves to look at the situation from a fresh perspective, from a beginner's mind. And so when I was asking this dreamer how they felt being trapped in this space, they said they had this feeling that it wasn't okay to have sovereignty in this environment, that they felt as if they didn't conform to the expected rules and regulations and thought forms of this environment, that there would be punishment, and not just a small punishment, but the dreamer talked about knowing that there were catacombs underneath this church where people were being killed and tortured. So it was actually a very difficult and scary dream for the dreamer. So without getting into all of the weeds with that, what we discovered, I think that was so important from this curiosity, was this somatic sense of not being able to have one's original voice, of needing to conform to a pressure that they felt trapped in, that was being espoused by everyone around them. And so then the next part of the courtship process is to try to make bridges between, first of all, to reflect back what the dreamer has said to me, so they can hear it coming out of my mouth instead of just out of theirs. And that is a very special key in and of itself, reflection. Because sometimes, as I'm sure you've had this experience, just hearing their own words spoken back to them can cause a dreamer to have an aha moment. And they're like, oh, I know what this is about, right? But ultimately, what we're trying to do is make a bridge between the symbolic experience, between the experience in the dream, and something that might be happening for the dreamer, either in their waking life or at a soul level in their conscious experience. And so in this particular case, the dreamer talked about feeling like the political landscape of their social world had become incredibly conformist. And there was a sense that there were real consequences to speaking differently to the way they were expected to speak in order to maintain a sense of belonging in this place. And I think that's an experience a lot of us can relate to right now. In fact, I have seen this theme in different forms come up in a lot of my dreamers' lives at this time. And so that became the moral question of this dream. Ultimately, how do we find a voice that is sovereign, that is authentic to us without jeopardizing our sense of belonging in the world?
Which again is a subject that you've spoken about in your previous book as well. It feels, lovely. Subsequent keys, we've got presence, curiosity, bridges.
Yes, the reflection is one of the keys.
Reflective back, yeah.
Yes, and then bridging, which is a key that I call relationality. So it's making relationships between our two worlds, but also making relationships in the ecosystem of the dream, because all of the symbols are connected through a kind of kinship system that operates as a sort of ecology. And then also just adding to that relational piece is making the relationship, as we just did briefly here, from the dreamer's experience to the larger collective problems that we're facing as a culture or as cultures globally. And then the final key, after we've made those bridges, is synthesis. And this is a really important key because what we tend to do in dream work is kind of go very much into the specificity of images. And we, in a way, we open things up through an amplification of those images, but then we have to contain them again. And this is a way of helping the dreamer to reorganize the story that they came in with in such a way that now it's in a deeper alignment with the dream's prompting and the dream's knowing. And what I really love to do with this key is not just recollect those pieces into a synthesizing statement or conversation, but also to come up with a kind of a ritual. Some sort of action that the dreamer can take from that new perspective that they can carry into their waking lives. And this is a very powerful and important step. It has a way of making magic real. When we do those ritual actions, synchronicity begins to respond. We start to have greater feelings of clairvoyance and telepathy and a sense of connectedness to that kinship world, the animate world around us. And a lot of people skip this step, even when we do come up with a ritual, which is unfortunate. But I think we're just not very much in the habit of doing these sorts of things. So we think, it doesn't matter. And we just move on because life is very busy, right? But this is the real magic. It's where the real magic lives.
The Dreamboat is a project of the DRI Center for Dream Studies. If you're the kind of person who is fascinated by the mystery of dreams and you want to learn more about the transformational power of dream work, check out our workshops, lectures, retreats, and training courses at driccpe.org.uk. Also on the website, you can support the podcast and all of DRI's work by becoming a member for just over £30 a year. That gets you discounts and first access for our ticketed events, as well as access to videos and extra material online. That's driccpe.org.uk, and you can find the link in the show notes. Now back to the podcast.
I love rituals after dreams when I'm working with clients. If there's something, there's a very clear message. How are you going to put that in operation? What's the ritual you're going to perform to make it happen, make it real? And it is a form of magic. I love how you say that, Toko Pa. It's there's something very sort of special. And as you're right, you then step into this, I'm going to call it psychic space, this transcendent space where all sorts of things are possible. As you say, this Jung loved synchronicity. For him, it was the sort of psychic space. The third way, I think, was one of the expressions he gave it. And it's a very powerful place to step into.
Yeah, I do. There's a chapter in my book called The Wisdom in Matter. And I speak a lot about wisdom in this book because wisdom is just the language which is actually really rooted in a lot of mystical systems of theology, mystical traditions, including Sufism and including Kabbalah and including Gnosticism. It's amazing how Sophia or wisdom shows up in all these different traditions in different forms. But wisdom, as we use the language, we sort of talk about it as if it's an attribute of intelligence or something, but actually it's not. It's an emanation of the divine, and so I speak a lot about wisdom in this book, and in very much in line with Jung's idea of synchronicity. I do this whole chapter on how wisdom can appear in physical matter. And that is when we see those moments of synchronicity, when the symbol or the idea or the dream appears in the waking world. And there is a sense for me of triumph in those moments, because when we're doing dream work, what we're really trying to do, and this is my broader definition of dream work, it's not just working with our nocturnal dreams, but it's actually practicing practicing a dynamic reciprocity between the seen and the unseen dimensions of our lives. And so when synchronicity happens on the outside, it's a big fat affirmation of you are on the right track and keep going this way. And where does it come from? It comes from some greater intelligence for which we have many, many names and for which we can't actually name, but which is the binding intelligence that runs through all things.
I like how you put that. I think that's very lovely. I was thinking, I often try to say to people, déjà vu moments are synchronicity. They're déjà vu because you've probably dreamt them. And it's only when you see it in waking life, it's like, oh, I know this. Why do I know this? You've probably dreamt it, is what I want to say to people.
Yes, you probably dreamt it at some point and maybe didn't remember. Or how about this? It's just a thinning between those two worlds where you can feel the resonance of the bothness of both it being symbolically important and also physically present. And I really do think that the work of incarnation is to come into a deeper connection with that resonance between the worlds.
Yeah. Again, that's so nice. That's that sort of, the thinning of the veil, as some of the ancients would call it, when the veil between this world and the next, or the realm, I prefer to world usually, between this realm and the next realm as such, it's that thinning. And there are certain moments in the year where, again, I often think at equinox, for instance, there's a sort of thinning of the veil. And All Saints, for instance, or All Hallows, or Halloween, or whatever name we're going to give it, is a great example of a time of year where the veil is very thin.
Yeah, it's actually a very important time in the Jewish tradition as well. It's actually considered the new year, and there's a practice in Jewish theology called teshuvah, which is it's called a returning, and so there's a sense of returning to something very important there, to returning to the path of soul. So yes, I agree. There are times of the year that. But I do feel that we can practice this at all times of year as well, that we don't necessarily have to wait for magic to happen, that magic is a practice. And the deeper we are in communion with our dreams, I think those of us who are dreamers have that sense of magic being much more accessible. And by contrast, I know if you've ever gone through one of these periods where you lose touch with your dreams, there is this deep sense of grief and a sense of something missing, of not really knowing which way your life is headed. That can also come up for us when we're out of touch with our dreams.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That's one of the most common questions we have of people writing in, is that I'm currently not dreaming, what do I do? And it is an issue. I know periods in my life. I think, the alarm clock, the dreaded alarm clock and mobile phone or cell phone, is the death of remembering your dreams first thing in the morning. That's why lockdown was very interesting for a lot of people. For a lot of people who could never remember their dreams, so they felt that they weren't dreaming, when in fact it was more a case of not remembering your dream. During lockdown, because they weren't racing up and there was more available time to settle, a lot of people found that they were in touch with their dreams finally. So there's something about, again, the veil, that liminal state that between waking and sleep that the dream world tends to inhabit in first thing in the morning in particular, is a very rich, fertile time where we don't want to be racing out because we can get in touch with what you call the dreaming way.
Yes, exactly.
So, Toko Pa, tell me a bit more about your influences. You've mentioned, obviously, both Jung and Sufism. How is there anything particular about dreaming in the Sufi world that you think is relevant that you would like to talk about?
Yes, well, the concept in Sufism of the imagination is very different from the Western concept of imagination. In Sufism, the imaginal world, or realm as you prefer, is alam al-mithal. And it is a literal place. It's not considered something that's trapped in the scaffolding of our brains, of our craniums, but is actually a place that we travel to when we're in our dreaming bodies. And this has always resonated for me much more than I think the Western perspective of mind. And so the idea in Sufi cosmology is that there are many realms, actually, many divine realms. But let's say, just to simplify, that there are three realms. One is the divine, the other is the physical world that we know so well, and in between them is the imaginal world. And so the symbols in our dreams, those figures that we meet in our dreams, are carriers of divine wisdom, and we go to meet them in the dreaming world, and the task is to bring that wisdom into this world. And we find something very similar in Judaism, especially in mystical Kabbalah. So I was born Jewish. I'm the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. So I also have that in my lineage, and it's very important for me as well. And so in the mystical system, there's something very similar that actually, as you know, for anyone who's read the Torah, or what's sometimes called the Old Testament, there are many, many dreams. And those dreams, like Jacob's ladder, for instance. And so the idea there with Jacob's ladder is, again, this sense of one travels up to the divine realms when they're sleeping and dreaming. And when he came out of that dream, he said, you know, God is in this place. I had no idea. God is in this place everywhere. And I think we have something very similar that we can experience when we go to our dreams, especially when we have a powerful dream. Even if that dream is a difficult dream, we have to wrestle with it. There's a sense of being visited upon by something holy. And so I find what the piece that you asked about my influences, and I would say that if we were to kind of broaden them, obviously I'm very influenced by Jung and the world of analytical psychology, but I also feel it has its limitations in that it's very much rooted in the secular rationalistic kind of perspective. And I think this reintroduction of the question of the divine and the holy is incredibly important and somehow very controversial still. And yet, you know, those of us who are dreamers, we always have this experience of what Jung called the numinous, you know, that sense of magic visiting us in our dreams.
Beautifully put, Toko Pa. And your dream school still going strong, I understand. It's now been going for what, 25 years?
Yes,
that's quite an achievement, isn't it?
Oh my gosh, it makes me feel old. But I back in the day when I first started the Dream School, we used to meet, it was before the internet, and we used to meet and get, like, I would put up posters and we used to meet and gather in small spaces, usually like, you know, maybe 10 people, that kind of thing. But with the advent of social media, I've been able to reach so many more people, and it made a lot of sense to be able to start teaching online. So I teach courses online. In fact, I have a regular course which I call the Dream Lodge. And the Dream Lodge is a 6-week course where people can learn the keys for the courtship method. So I do a bit of teaching in every class, but then we do live dream work with somebody in the class in every session. And so people can actually see how the tools are used interchangeably, how they work, or, where the hurdles might be. And then we as a group come together at the end of a dream work session to offer combined insights. So we have that group process involved as well. So I don't know when this will be airing, but I will be offering a Dream Lodge in January.
Toko Pa, what I'll do is I'll put links to both the book and to your site so people can find out when the next course is happening, and obviously get in touch with your team to take any contact with you further, which would be really lovely for people. And obviously the book is out, The Dreaming Way, and we'll have links to that also on our site. Toko Pa, thank you very much for spending some time with us, and look forward to having you back on board at some stage. It's been really lovely to find out about a whole new approach, your approach to dreaming. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been a joy to be here with you.
So, thank you for joining us for this week's episode. Don't forget to like us and leave comments on your favourite podcast platform. As I'm sure you know, that's the way we build an audience for the Dreamboat podcast, and also to spread news about dreaming. And as we said, there are many ways you can share your dreams at the DRI, the Dream Research Institute.
Yes, we have courses, events, and workshops, and we want to hear from you. So check out the show notes for links, or find us on Instagram and on our Facebook page and on our website at driccpe.org.uk. And if you want to explore your dreams further, or you would like to support us, you can join the DRI as a member for just £30 a year. As a member, you will get discounts for all of our events and short courses. You'll get our newsletter with latest dream research news, and we'll also be adding other special member benefits during the year. Of course, members' dreams will always be given preference for reading on the podcast Dream of the Week slot. So go to the link on the show notes and become a DRI member today. Keep dreaming and keep sharing your dreams.